Do you guys know that South Korea was once one of the poorest countries in the entire world? In just 50 years, South Korea went from war-torn poverty to global innovation. But how did they do it? And what can the rest of the world learn from them? Well, I'm here to talk all about it in my new series, Lessons for the World, and I'll be talking about it while I do my makeup. Before we get into this, I'd like to tell you all about an incredible Korean app, Trendy. Trendy is South Korea's leading luxury goods marketplace that combines competitive pricing with strict authenticity control. It provides buyers all over the world with a seamless and safe way to buy pre-loved and brand new luxury items. Trendy is trusted by celebrities and is ranked top 10 in Korean shopping apps. And it offers worldwide shipping for a flat fee of $49 and a 7-day no questions asked return label. With transparent pricing and real-time order tracking, Trendy has millions of satisfied customers and very strong review ratings. I would highly recommend that you guys check them out, and I left a link in my description. And now let's get back to the video. All right, so the Korean War left Korean cities in complete destruction. Okay, the economy collapsed, and Seoul was basically sent back to pre-World War II infrastructure, right? So it went back years and years. And South Korea became heavily reliant on the United States because it was just in bad shape. There was tons of inflation, there were super high unemployment rates. It was just not a good situation. Now, over the span of 10 years, South Korean government decided to redistribute land from large landlords to the farmers who were actually working the land. And they did this to kind of promote like agricultural production, and it was actually very effective. It was also a way to kind of close the wealth inequality gap and, aid all the unemployment. So people were more motivated to work and they had more resources and land to work with. So initially there was a heavy emphasis on agricultural production, right? Because people needed to eat. And that really paved the way for industrialization to really thrive because it provided a very solid foundation for the country, which I'll get into more later. And South Korea placed a huge emphasis on education, so much so that by the end of a 10-year span, it became one of the countries with the highest literacy rates. So they really did their thing and they progressed in a very timely manner. There was also an emphasis on Confucianism, which is sort of a philosophy that emphasizes familial and humanist values, some say over religion, and it promoted educational and just like an overall emphasis on having important like labor and life skills. Okay, now by the 1960s, which is basically 10 years after the Korean War ended, President Park Chung-hee took power in 1961 and he kind of overthrew the government, but he is credited with what they call South Korea's economic miracle. Okay, so he developed a plan which really turned South Korea's economy completely around. This was known as a 5-year plan, which is similar to what India did, and I talk about that in another video. And this plan optimized industrialization and it put emphasis on infrastructure, and it also pushed for South Korea to have a larger export sector. So they wanted to export more stuff out of South Korea. And this 5-year plan was extremely helpful with making Korea what it is now. So the first plan was between 1962 to 1966, and this was kind of like the foundation of everything, right? So it pushed for South Korea to kind of like build infrastructure and focus on their agriculture and things of that nature. Okay, so it was like kind of foundational. That was the first plan. Okay, so once these basic industries were created and established, then the second plan was put into place, which was between 1967 to 1971. And this plan focused on exporting things from these now established industries, right? And this plan basically pushed for South Korea to start selling their stuff to other countries, right? That's what exporting is. And then came the third plan, which occurred between 1972 to 1976. And this was basically producing steel and mixing chemicals to create gas, right? So it was kind of like advancing South Korea's output into bigger industries outside of like agriculture and like the basic stuff once they had some money from like all the exporting that they were doing. Okay, so pretty solid plan, right? Like things were kind of going as they should, and it was commenced within 5 years. And the government did a good job in like kind of mixing public and private relations. So they followed a chaebol system. I'm probably butchering the name, but it's basically a system that protected really large families that owned major companies that were like international mega companies that really helped Korea thrive, right? So families that owned LG, Samsung, they were pretty much protected and their companies were protected, and the South Korean government gave them loans and all kinds of assistance to keep going. And with the progression of everything else, South Korea's GDP increased anywhere from 8 to 10% annually. So this is a significant, increase in sales and production and just economic growth. Okay, now this all happened pretty much within the span of 20 years, okay? So like imagine like a child that you've seen grow up and go to college. Like, yeah, it's like pretty long time, but you know, within a person's lifetime for sure, okay? So this turnaround was major. And by the 1980s, South Korea became a major exporter of automobiles and tech on the world stage. So by this time, South Korea's economy was doing really well, okay? But then the president randomly got assassinated in 1979 and was overthrown by a military coup. And a new leader named Chun Do-hwan took over, okay? But there was opposition against him. So there was like the very infamous Gwangju uprising in 1980, and people didn't really love him, but he was also really instrumental in getting South Korea into a better place economically. And he ruled between 1980 to 1988. And before he came out of power, there was the June 1987 Democratic Uprising, which pretty much overthrew him. And a new president came into power named Roh Tae-woo, and he was Korea's first democratically elected president. And he rose to power and oversaw democratization of South Korea. And within his first year, he even hosted International Olympics in Seoul, which pretty much showed the world South Korea's progress, right? And then when he came out of power in 1993, another president rose to power, and his name was Kim Young-sam, and he was the first like civilian president that South Korea saw in decades at that time. And he focused a lot on transparency and economic reform. So overall, although there were periods of political unrest, South Korea was seeing like a positive trajectory in their economy, okay? And by the 90s came, they were leaders in innovation in technology, and government policy began to shift towards research and development, which is really instrumental in making Korea what it is right now, okay? And I'll get into a little bit more later. Okay, and they continue to invest in STEM and overall research for the country. And all of this eventually paid off because Korea now ranks as one of the top countries for higher education. It has ranked significantly in like pop culture. I mean, like you see like K-pop stars everywhere, and you know, it's like they're really doing their thing. And a lot of it has to do with like the emphasis that they put on, you know, like researching and kind of like catching up with the world and contributing to the world in that way. And they were smart because they spent about 4% of their GDP back into research so that they can continue to grow and, you know, learn as the world changed. All right, it's super hot, so I had to put my hair up. But let's talk about what we can learn, or what the world can learn from South Korea. All right, now there are a few things that they did really well, and despite the political unrest that they did face, they managed to really make it work, okay? I would say that in terms of rebuilding, South Korea did a really good job in being strategic and resourceful in a very simple kind of way. Like when the government redistributed land right after the Korean War to help with unemployment and wealth inequality, that proved to be very effective in solving those problems. And it also promoted like a production of agriculture, which the country really needed to thrive. And more agriculture led to more industrialization, which led to economic growth. The emphasis on education was also super helpful in helping the Korean economy grow and creating knowledgeable citizens who then became productive citizens, which helped shape the country. And I think that foundation during the first 10 years between 1950 to the 1960s really helped make the 5-year plan successful. I mean, the plan just basically continued emphasizing agriculture and education. And then once that was established enough, it was able to start exporting things from like, you know, the basic industries that it established. And then the country was able to move on to bigger and better ventures, like creating steel, which is pretty much what made the country what it is now. I can also recognize how the South Korean government was able to bring together powerful families, or like chaebols, and use their companies to help drive the country forward and give back to the country in a way, and help South Korea rank higher in world industries. And then it was also really smart of them to take those earnings and invest it back into research so that they can continue to grow and keep up with what the world wants and what it's calling for. And they did it in such a way which enhanced their nation's global and cultural influence. Okay, so that's all I have for you guys today. I just took my hair down and I added a little bit of blush, and this is the final look. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you think that we can apply South Korea's lessons anywhere else. I'd love to hear what you guys think about its progress overall. And thanks again for watching. Don't forget to comment, share, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, all sources in the comments.